off. So it's a very great pleasure and privilege to have a chance to talk to Martin Jacques. Martin, when and where were you born?
Well, I was born in 1945 in Coventry. My father was working at Armstrong Siddeley, which was then basically an aircraft factory. I suppose he was in charge of the research library, and my mother she was a mathematician, and she worked in the stress department. That's how they met. And then afterwards she became a full-time mother, because my sister came along 2 years later after me, and then she became a full-time teacher because my father got the sack from Armstrong Siddeley because he was a member of the Communist Party, and under martial aid you were not allowed to employ members of the Communist Party in white-collar jobs.
Really?
Mm.
When you say under martial aid, you mean any company was not allowed to?
I would imagine, I don't know whether it was any company. I shouldn't think so.
This was a sensitive
it would have been,
company.
aircraft factory.
Yes, yeah, I see. Do you know anything further back about your grandparents?
Yeah, on my mother's side, my grandfather was an accountant, with one, and I think he started his training with one of the big firms, Thomson's or something like that then, and then he he was chief accountant at Humbers, which later became part of the Roots Group and so on, and his wife was her maiden name was Sankey, Lillian Sankey, and there was a firm called Sankey's, so I assume she was probably linked to that. They were a West Midlands kind of commercial family, basically, I think, both sides were. And then on my dad's side, my paternal grandfather, he was the manager of a co-op store, and that was his last job, and he worked I think it was in Nuneaton, and his wife, a maiden name Jones, and she came from the South Wales valleys, and her father was, I can't remember what that union used to be, but there was a union that was sort of in colliery managers or something like that. It was a notch above the sort of National Union of Mine Workers, and so her father, that's where her father came from. I think she came from Unisable.
Returning to your parents, what was their character like? I mean, how do you think they shaped you as people? Strict, kind, ferocious?
I was close to both my parents. My mother was she was quite unusual for the time. I remember in Coventry, because she was a maths graduate from the 1930s, and Royal Holloway, and she was she was extremely kind, thoughtful person, and very selfless person, selfless to a T, too selfless, and she was a very educated woman. She wasn't very articulate with words. Words were not her thing, but I suppose numbers were her thing, really. And then she became a teacher and so on, and because my dad had to retrain, he retrained as a teacher, and so he had to go off to London for a year. So my mother looked after us and so on. And then she was a primary school teacher, and then she went to a grammar school and so on. But my memory of my mum is also very shaped by her illness. She probably had a heart attack when she was about 39, and she had various, probably repeat ones. That it wasn't diagnosed until much later that was probably what had happened to her. So she was always. This affected her energy levels and so on. So that was sort of blighted her life. I remember her going to bed very early by my standards, 9 o'clock or something like that. I was very, very close to my mother. We sort of had a telepathic communication. My dad was they were both interested in politics, but my dad was very interested in politics and was very interested in history, and he never went to university, and he was very interested in the war, and he was always reading about the war, Second World War mainly, and
was he involved with it?
No, because he was at the aircraft factory. So if you were in the aircraft factory, that was.
It was all right to be a communist during the war in the aircraft.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the people in the factory were members then, because so many people joined around sort of 1943, which is when they joined. Because my mother joined then as well. I think probably most of the stress department joined. And they both stayed in the Communist Party, and that clearly affected me. I mean, they never. There was a lot of discussion at home, but political discussion, but not. There was never any expectation or pressure on me about my views, or it was quite. In that sense, it was quite laid back, but clearly it did affect me because when I got into my teens, I got involved in CND, and then I later joined the Communist Party and so on. And but they were, I suppose, they weren't doctrinaire people for their time, if you know what I mean. I mean, you could say, well, it was quite doctrinaire anyway then, but they weren't. So they gave. I think that what did they do? I think they contributed. I think from my mother, I got my sense of values and personal morality and what mattered in life, and appreciating other people and not putting yourself first. These are all very, very strong things I got from my mother. And I think from both of them, probably particularly my father, I got a passion, an interest in politics and history and so on. And then I think from my mother especially, I would have got an ability to think laterally and out of the box, and sort of think for yourself.
What is your earliest memory? Not sort of vague leaves over your pram sort of memory, but something concrete. Do you remember any specific?
Well, yeah, I got my first memory like that. I mean, I do have memories going back much, to. I remember being in the front garden, of a little semi-detached 1930s suburban place when I was, lying in the pram. I got a memory like that. But my first really scorching memory, I think, was my mum and dad having a fight.
Physical fight?
Yeah. And I imagine it was when my dad was retrained. It was the only time I ever saw this. I suppose that's, if I was going to be a regular occasion, I wouldn't have remembered this one because there would have been so many others. But I think I must have been, 3 or something, 3 or 4, and my sister would have been 2 years younger. And I suppose it was probably the time my dad was in London. He hated, I think, probably going off to retrain in London, and that there was a lot of tension and how we're going to, money was a problem and all that. So, because it didn't happen, you know, they had a relationship of its time, very powerful gender division of labour, but they were, you know, and they were inseparable. So.
What was your first school?
Well, my first school was Radford Primary School, which was in well, you'd call it now an inner city school. And the reason, well, actually there was another school I went to very briefly for probably a term first, called Fletchhampstead. The reason was because there was the family crisis was that my dad had to go to London, so and mum needed to work. Fortunately, her sister, they had the two of them, was a headmistress, just been appointed. So she could offer my mum, a job in the primary school. And so this is at Radford, which is why I went, because my sister was too young to go to school, and of course there were no nursery provisions really. So my sister had to hang around the school during the day. And so I was there I was at Radford Primary School from 5 to 11.
Were you, by that time, particularly interested in anything, either in the school or messing around in the hobbies or in the streets or doing anything? I mean, were you collecting things? Were you keen on games? What were you doing?
Well, that's a good question. Bringing up my son now, I think I had great expanses of time that he doesn't have to do. Probably not very much. I mean, my first, I was, I wasn't interested in reading. So I didn't start reading until I was 7. And the reason I didn't start reading, the reason I started reading was because around that time, coming from Coventry, I became an avid follower of motor racing. And I remember writing to Sterling Moss when he was the sort of hero figure at the time. Sort of, dear Sterling, I think you're a great driver. I don't know what it said, but something like this, And lo and behold, he replied. So there started a long correspondence which went on until I gave it up in my very early teens. But I used to go, anyway, my mum and dad said, look, you're so keen on it and so on. And anyway, I wanted to read these motor racing magazines, so that's how I learned how to read. Then I had an interest. So unlike my son, who's completely different, he got an astonishing sort of fictional repertoire already, whereas I never had anything like that. And so they said, well, we'll take you to the British Grand Prix in 1954, and they bought me a paddock ticket, and I went to meet Sterling Moss, and that's what I used to do. And I loved, absolutely passionate about it. So if you ask me what was the biggest thing in my life, that was it. That was it. I liked sport. I liked playing football a lot, and but there wasn't much sport on offer in those days. It was basically football. We didn't play. I don't know what we did in the summer, but we didn't do football. We didn't do cricket on that primary school. I didn't have. I wasn't interested. I mean, I was too young really to be interested in politics, and that's all I did. That was it. I think that I can remember.
And then at 11, you did 11 plus, did you?
Yeah.
And then you went on. Where did you go to school?
I went to. There were two direct grammar schools in Coventry, and I went to King Henry VIII at the age of 11, and that was. I loved going to secondary. I mean, this was a huge experience. In fact, I remember my dad saying to, Harry, my wife, before they both died, and Harry and Dad. Harry told me this. Dad saying that as soon as Martin went to the secondary school, to the grammar school, he came home and he disappeared upstairs to do his homework, and he never reappeared till he'd finished his homework, and that was always the way. And he told Harry that they never ever had to say to me to do my work, because it was always my priority. So it was I loved going to secondary school. I loved the work. I was good at lots of different subjects.
What were your best subjects?
My best subjects were, for a long time, my best subjects was maths. I was a maths person. But I was also good, at history and geography. I wasn't very good at languages. Well, I was good at Latin, but not French. That's the wrong way around, really. And I really enjoyed history and geography and so on. But maths was math. So I chose the science route. Actually, I remember when I first went to grammar school. I don't know how they selected. There was a lot of streams, 5-6 streams. And there were 30 in a stream, and I remember they sorted them out in the playground, and the first class, and I thought the second class, I wasn't in that one. The third class, I was in the fourth stream, And I remember going back and I thought, why am I in the fourth stream? I haven't done anything yet. And I told my parents. They didn't say anything. But I'm quite a tough person, really, and so I thought this has got to be a big mistake. So by the end of that first year, I got promoted into I became one of the top kids in the school always. But and I was always, I was in when it was. But I say that because I remember personally that had a motivating effect on me. Actually. Then I did. It was very early streaming for A-level and so on. I did double maths and physics at A-level.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
But during the course of my teens, I changed a lot. Well, everyone changed a lot, but I became political. I became I became aware of the world, of society, of all those sorts of questions. I began to define myself as left wing, and this began to eat into my interest in maths, really, I think. And so when I finished my time at after my A levels, I decided to, I didn't want to do maths at university, so I decided to stay on at school for an extra year and do history and economics, and which is what I did. But there was very, very little teaching available because I could, by the time you're 18 you can select. So I decided, I roughly organised my syllabus myself and what papers I was going to do. I had some teaching in one of the two economics papers, but otherwise the other one I did myself, and both history papers I did myself. And I did. It was a brilliant year. I loved it. I loved it far more than my maths by then, even though I used to love maths earlier on. And so I went to university. I got a place at Cambridge, but I decided I didn't want to go to Cambridge because I wasn't sure I could cope with Cambridge.
Did you come for an interview or anything?
Yeah, I came for an Corpus, and but I didn't want to. I decided I didn't want to because I had very little exposure. I came from where we lived. We lived in a sort of we lived in Coventry, which was a very, very kind of proletarian city dominated by large factories with the culture that went with it. It's not an interesting city. It wasn't an interesting city beyond that. There's no real middle class worth mentioning then in Coventry. So it was quite a Philistine environment. You know, there was later one theatre, the Belgrade Theatre, and so my range of contacts was very limited, I would say. And so coming to somewhere like Cambridge, you know, for the interview and so on, I didn't feel comfortable here, and I'd got no exposure to private school. I mean, you know, direct grammar school was, you know, not quite 100% 11 plus, but the great majority. So I didn't, and I'd been up to Manchester for an interview, and I quite fancied living in I'd never been to a big industrial northern city, and I liked Manchester, so I thought, okay, I'll go to Manchester. So that's what I did.
To read history in English?
No, I went to read economics initially. That was what, yeah.
Actually, there's one question I always like to ask about this school, secondary school. Were there any teachers who particularly inspired you? Sometimes there's one or two teachers who people remember. If there wasn't, it doesn't matter. But
there was no teacher that I have memories of lots of teachers. There was no teacher that really was, you know,
changed your life.
No. There was a teacher that I admired, but there was no teacher that I can say this is where something started.
Yeah. Okay. Manchester, how was that? Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I had a great time in Manchester. I did enjoy the city very, very much. I found that very interesting. This was 1964. I really sort of began to become what I was for quite a long time there, I suppose. One, I was very academically committed, and also I was hugely politically committed. I became extremely active politically, as I was till I left Cambridge, and I learnt a lot through it, and I learnt a lot of skills through it, and it was a very, very interesting period to be a student, because it was, well, 64 to 66 was not so interesting, but from after that it was exceptional. It was an exceptional period, I think.
You say you were politically active. I mean, in what way? Were you in the student union, or were you a member of the party by then, or not?
Yeah, I joined. Basically, I'd briefly been in the YCL, Young Commoners in Coventry, but I didn't get very involved in because I was, you know, studying and so on. But when I went to university, I joined the Communist Party, and I was also very active in the student union. So I became a member of the student council and so on. And one of my conflicts in my mind was, you know, am I going to? There was pressure for me to stand for president of the union, which is a relatively big job for that age when you're in a university like Manchester. But I never did, because it really the two occasions when I were third year, I didn't want to do that, and I stayed on for a year, which was a mistake, and I could have done it then. But I didn't. I always held back, and I think I was right. There was one year I definitely could have got it, but I don't know about the other. You never know with big elections and so on. A lot of people voting. And then I was very active in the Communist Party and in the left, and you know, it began to become, as time went by, more and more interesting, because you know, Vietnam and apartheid and lots of things. So you know, I burned the candle at both ends in the sense of my politics and my academic life. Manchester was. What happened was I started in economics, and then I drifted sort of into economic history. Really, that's how my progress took place. And the third year, I did my sort of my core specialist area was the interwar period. And then I remember an incident, which was that, you know, I was very active in the student movement. I was very well known. I was in the national newspapers. There was something called the Radical RSA, Radical Student Alliance, formed, and you know, And I was one of, the revolting students kind of thing. And I remember this guy phoned me up for the Daily Telegraph, and I can't remember what month it was. It was probably about January or February or something. Phoned me up, was on the call box, and he said, people say that all you revolting students, you militant students, you don't do any work. And actually, he said, in my experience, this isn't true. That the activist students, not all of them, but a fair number, are very good students. So I said, yeah, I think that's right. He said to me, well, what about you? So I said, well, I'd like to think I'm a very good student. I do one of my exams. And he said, what are you going to get in your degree? So I said to him, well, I'm going to get a first. So I thought to myself afterwards, when it was in the newspaper, I said, well, I have to actually get a first now. I can't not get one. So I remember cutting myself adrift from the university in I don't know, March. I decided, pulled out of all my political activities, because I knew I hadn't done enough work. Because if you're doing it like that, you don't do enough work. And organised my, a monastic regime based partly in Manchester and partly in Coventry. But I did get my first then.
You did? Mm. I was just wondering...
There weren't many firsts those days. I remember there were 200... It's in the Faculty of Economics, and there were only 4 firsts for 250 students. Mm. I mean, it was...
No, it's at least 10%. So
yeah.
Just thinking, I was going to ask about your parents too, as well as you. I mean, post-1956, this was a big trauma for the British and other members of the Communist Party after Hungary. Did this affect you onwards? I mean, and I'm not sure when the revelations about Stalin started to, become really serious. But were there internal doubts or divisions?
For me, I was too young.
Too young.
I mean, I was 56. I must have just turned 11. It was in the autumn, wasn't it?
So you were too young actually to even think about Hungary in 1956, but surely that had a sort of knock-on effect, and there were a number of people who left the party at that point, and later on news was coming out about what was inside the Soviet Union. Did that affect discussions at all? Or?
At home, because that's where it would be. Yes. It would only be at home. What I do remember is I remember the news. I remember seeing the news. I remember seeing bodies in the streets of Budapest. I remember asking my dad, what's it all about? I can't remember what he said. And then I can't remember, so that's all I can really remember. Subsequent to that, I remember the Khrushchev speech vaguely. But it wouldn't make much. And the Stalin. I mean, of course, if I'd have been a bit older, it would have made a huge impact. And I remember a bit that we see a bit later. Then there was some kind of speech given by Togliatti, who was then the General Secretary of the Italian Communist Party, which was asking some much bigger questions about what was going on. And I remember my dad was very interested in that. And he showed me it. I can't remember I don't think I read it, but he showed me, this is very interesting and so on. So but I can't exhume anything else from my memory. It is an interesting question because, by the time I went to university, I think that, when I really became, started intellectually being involved in a different way on these sorts of things, 56 was a strange blank for me, and it was bizarre, because it had been so defining for so many intellectuals. You know, loads had left the Communist Party, and those that stayed had agonised over whether they should stay, and there were others that sort of who dismissed it all, I suppose. But the great defining moment for me was 1968. This was the invasion of Czechoslovakia. So my 56, because of my age, was 1968.
Okay, well, we'll come to that in a second. You said that, we've come to the end of your undergraduate degree. Though I wondered whether you said the two things you did were politics and work. I mean, were there other things? I mean, were you interested in music or acting or sport or anything?
Yeah, I was interested in. I used to. I wasn't. I was never in any of the university teams, but I was keen on. You know, I did some football. I played a lot of tennis. I became good at tennis in my secondary school, and represented the school, and we won the Coventry Championship and that kind of thing. But and I carried on, but I didn't get intensively involved in sport. I played it recreationally. And I used to go to the theatre, and I went to watch the Halle Orchestra from time to time. I think it was, we used to play in was it the Lesser Free Trade Hall then? And I remember seeing, Oh What a Lovely War with Joan Littlewood. I used to go, I used to, and I went to the cinema and so on. I mean, I don't think I was hyperactive, but I was certainly, it was part of my life.
Meanwhile, down on Merseyside, something was happening.
Well, of course, thank you for the prompt. I would say, as a boy, as a teenager, I was a bit behind the curve.
So Elvis Presley passed you by? A bit.
Elvis Presley passed me by, mainly, but not my sister. 2 years younger, but more advanced on these things. And but generally, I didn't get. I wasn't particularly. I was probably a bit behind the curve on girls at that time, when I was, sort of in my mid-teens, and clothes didn't interest me very much at that stage, but did later. So, but when the Beatles arrived, by then I was interested in pop music. I was interested before the Beatles, but the Beatles had made popular culture, popular music, Merseyside, Manchester was very interesting, made a big impact on me. And you couldn't, Manchester University was a very big centre for lots of groups. So and the guy that ran the social side of things then was Chris Wright, who later was the big entrepreneur behind Chrysalis and so on. So that was part of breathing the air, really.
The other thing, which you may have been behind the curve or advanced of the curve, which often happens in late teenage and the teenage period, is religion. Some people with certain schools go through confirmation, and you didn't mention whether in theory, if your parents were communists and religion is out, has this been the case with you as well?
That's why I didn't mention it. My parents were they were atheists. So I don't think they never shoved anything down. I don't remember either me ever shoving anything down my throat. So I used to always go to assembly, and I used to sing the hymns and say the prayers and so on. But I never, except for I virtually never went to church. It wasn't just. I regret it in some ways, looking back on it, because religion, it's not just about belief; it's about custom and
ritual
and so on, very important, and so I think if I'd had more exposure to that, I would have understood it better. But I would say that intellectually, subsequently, because I was never engaged with it in that kind of way, I tended to not intellectually think about it or engage with it in that sense either, and that was my loss, I think. I mean, I would think that probably, it was my loss. And and when Harry died and I couldn't really cope with the situation at all, I knew that if I'd been religious, that would have been something that maybe it would have helped me, but I wasn't. And I didn't become so.
You said after the university you wasted a year. What were you doing? I mean, you just...
I did a master's, and the thing was that I think that the sheer effort, in the third year of doing all that politics and then pulling out and then throwing myself into this tremendous kind of surge of work, and I didn't really think, what am I going to do next year, where am I going to go, and so on. So the thinking for that came, instead of coming in my third year, it came when I was doing my master's. And so I did a thesis. I did quite an interesting subject, actually. I did the nature and role of state intervention in Britain between something like, it was a big thing. I wrote 80,000 words in a year, between 1900 and 1945, something. I got 39, something like that. It was a very interesting subject, but it was based on secondary sources, and then I decided I was fed up with Manchester by then, and I knew I'd made a mistake, and I was a year out, if you know what I mean, and so I decided. There was someone, my girlfriend then, her tutor had been at Cambridge for a PhD, and he said, "Why don't you go to Cambridge?" So I did.
Were there any teachers at Manchester lecturers or anyone who... Manchester had a great tradition of economic history and Ashton and so on, and also of economics in the late 19th, early 20th century. Were there any teachers by that time who were outstanding? You loved their lectures, or they taught you?
It's an obvious question. I mean, I used to go to, of course I went to my own lectures, I used to go occasionally to other lectures and so on. I can't think of anyone who, there were lectures I quite liked, lectures that I liked, but that's not really the question, I don't think. Was there anyone that really inspired me? I don't think there was. I mean, you're right. There was there's a strong historical tradition. There was a strong economic history tradition. This was Challoner and Henderson.
That's right.
Challoner was my tutor in my third year, and of course he was. By then, I was aware of the debates and Hobsbawm and the standard of living question in the first half of the 19th century, and of course Challoner was very much defined himself on the right. But Bill, he loved me, absolutely loved me, and we got on great. I mean, he wasn't intellectually a very inspiring person, but he was a very nice man, and so we got on great, and he'd been teaching this interwar thing for, I don't know, 18 years, and he said to me, he was always Jacques, he said, "Jacques, you're the first I've had in all the years I've been teaching this subject," but I can't say what you're asking me is more than that. You're saying, did he inspire you? No, I don't think I had any lecturers in that period that inspired me. I mean, I went through school, and you made me think about this. I went through school and my undergraduate life without really
having a hero.
Yeah, exactly. That. I mean, I did have people that I really read, but they tended to be, I read a lot of Hobsbawm, but that I didn't know him, and he was just he was a name and articles and his early books.
Okay, well, I hope it all changes when you come to Cambridge. Your sense that you would be out of place in Cambridge as an undergraduate, what did you feel when you came as a graduate? How did it go?
Well, the first term was...
you came to King's College, Cambridge. Yeah.
And I suppose I came to King's because, left-wing tradition and all that.
Yeah.
And I made a mistake, I think, when I came, because I had an option to live in, and I decided not to, because I thought, well, I don't want to live in a hall of residence. Of course, it's not a hall of residence, so I should have lived in, but I didn't. The first year was not easy, because I think that a mistake I made in my higher education was never to take a break.
You mean a gap year?
A year off, of some kind. I mean, you didn't take gap years then, and in the way they become a sort of industry. And I think I was exhausted, because I'd really been doing two jobs. I'd been doing my academic life, and I'd been doing my political life. And I wanted to have I needed to think of things from a different angle. I needed to be less on a treadmill. Another factor that increased this problem was that when my girlfriend in Manchester became my wife at the end of my first year at university, and so she was in Manchester still, so that was
difficult.
There was a lot of travelling. So it took the first term. I didn't really settle, and I resented what seemed to me to be a ridiculous Cambridge mentality. This idea that this was the centre of the world. Cambridge people think Cambridge is some kind of epicentre, and I said, well, how can you think that? I've come from Manchester, a big industrial city. But as the time went by, I really, really enjoyed myself here. This was what I never got at Manchester. And what I really got was, I did my PhD, it was a good PhD, etc. But what I really got from Cambridge was the stimulation of lots of very bright people and conversations that I'd never had before, or subjects that were explored, that I thought I knew, that were explored in quite new ways. And so this was very, very good for me. And of course I was, by then the left had exploded, because it was 1968, and so this started not in 68, it actually all started in 67. And this very, very new kind of atmosphere. And this was intellectually and politically very stimulating and so on. And I was hugely bound up with all that. The left was a very stimulating place during this period. I don't mean that it was right, but it was a very stimulating atmosphere. And I met lots of very, very interesting and very intelligent people from whom I learnt a lot. And I threw myself into that. And what I got from Cambridge was not so much my PhD. What I got was this tremendous intellectual stimulation. This was when I think I was really, this period from around about 67, before I left Manchester, from about 67 to 71 when I left Cambridge, was sort of my formation in a way.
If you were here in 68, was Provost Leach provost by then?
Yeah. Yeah.
What did you have any encounters?
No,
with him?
I didn't have any kind of. I didn't sit in his office or anything like that.
Did you know him at all? Or?
No, not really. No, I didn't. I knew. Who did I know then? I knew. The senior tutor then was Ken Polak,
Oh yes.
and the graduate tutor was Bob Young.
Yes, and he was quite a left-wing character.
Yeah, he was.
wasn't he?
Yeah, and then Geoffrey Lloyd
Yes.
followed Ken Polak as senior tutor.
Yeah.
I got on very well with Geoffrey Lloyd.
Did you?
Yeah,
He's a very nice man.
yeah. I really. In fact, he was one of the people when I was leaving Cambridge. King's. We weren't that close, but I thought I'll miss. I was going to miss him. I really liked him very much. I enjoyed him, and then of course Bob Rowthorne. I became very good friends with Bob Rowthorne in that period. Probably my closest friend.
Was he doing a PhD or?
No, he was a fellow, but he never did a PhD.
Oh, he was a fellow by then.
Yeah, and he was a lecturer in economics.
Was Keith Hopkins here then, or not?
Doesn't ring a bell.
No, he'd gone to the LSE by then.
But I mean, there was a lot of people I knew well, academically as well. Paul Ginsburg, who was
Sociologist.
a historian. Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, Brian Pollitt was here. I knew him quite well. He was working on Cuba then, and a lot. I mean, John Dunn, Martin Bernal.
Martin, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think your interest in China was that anything to do with Martin?
Nothing at all.
No.
Because I did actually, because my first academic job was in Bristol after Cambridge, and I did invite Martin down actually, but I didn't know him hardly at all. But he came down and I arranged two talks. One on he did one on Vietnam and one on China. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. But to be honest with you, Alan, it was like a kind of capsule because it didn't inform what I was interested in beyond being fascinated by the dog. What I should say to you is that my big political change came in 1967-68. I rose very rapidly to a high position in the Communist Party in that period. I became a member of its executive committee, the youngest member, probably youngest ever or something. About 22 or something like that. And I was much too young for that situation, and I felt very uncomfortable there and out of place. But I stayed the course. And I felt, and it coincided that having that position with getting that position in late 67 with this huge political change, which really, as a university person, started in the autumn of 67 into 68. And it was when I basically rethought lots of things that I had thought previously. It was when I came into contact with Gramsci's ideas, which was, insofar as any Marxist thinker shaped me, it was Gramsci, not Marx, not Lenin, certainly not Lenin, and so on. And to this day, I have this day. I mean, if there was anyone that shaped Marxism today, in broad terms, it would be probably that some of his ideas, the notion of hegemony and so on. And I watched with great interest from the end of 1967, beginning of 1968, what was happening in Czechoslovakia. The action programme was published in January. I became very strong advocate of what was happening in Czechoslovakia. I went to Prague in August. Was it late July, early August 1968? And when the Soviet tanks invaded Czechoslovakia, well, it was for me. Well, I think I don't know why I stayed in the Communist Party. I mean, I think that I stayed in the Communist Party because the Communist Party at that point opposed, the British Conspiracy opposed the intervention in Czechoslovakia. Yeah. If it hadn't, it would have been curtains. And but I felt that even though they opposed it on the weakest grounds, and so various factors unleashed a sort of me on a very independent-minded trajectory. This is when I sort of really grew up, if you like, and I became, you know, I could say, well, these now, whatever ideas, these were really my ideas now. I wasn't inheriting them. They were, you know, I was working out my position on my view, my world view of some kind in that period. And Cambridge was a very important crucible for that as well.
And you mentioned Vietnam, and I went on the big march.
The march, yes, with the violence.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. But that must have been about 71, because I wasn't here till 71.
Oh, okay. There was a big violent one in 1968 in March.
Oh, maybe, yes, I was at the LSE then. Maybe I went from the LSE. But how did Vietnam play into all your...
Vietnam was... I mean, I think that I was probably, you know, that Vietnam was easily the most important issue around then, and I think it was the biggest single issue that radicalised students, apart from much broader, you know, cultural contexts, which were clearly very much at work, because I think looking back on that period now, the libertarian rather than the left trend was stronger. And that wasn't a function so much of Vietnam, so there were other coordinates. But I mean, the feeling on Vietnam was so strong, and you know, when I was at Manchester in sort of 67, 68, it seemed as if there was a march every weekend, you know. And or something going on, and then you go down to London, and then we organised a big teach-in. I can't remember that where I was. I can't remember. But my memory of Vietnam was you know, extraordinary. You know, I shared the very strong feelings that students had in that period, and was very active on it.
Has it continued to shape your attitude to America at all?
I think that what probably Vietnam did was, if you're on the left, was made me, you know, antipathetic to the United States, and fed a certain kind of anti-Americanism, I think. And because I had never, you know, I hadn't been to the States then, I think, you know, I never. Some students, some people went to the States, but I didn't, and I wish I had actually, but I didn't, and so.
You've been there subsequently?
Many times, yeah. Especially in the last 2 or 3 years, and I really enjoy going to the States now. Really enjoy it.
And what is your feeling about its current trajectory, apart from enjoying it?
Well, when I say I really enjoy going, I really enjoy appreciating it, like getting to understand it, like Americans. Which isn't the same as liking America, and I think it's going to be the outlook for America is going to be extremely difficult. And I think that America is now in decline, and but Americans by and large, although they're now debating it, discussing it in a way that's never been discussed before, they're just at the beginning of this process.
Is this relative decline or absolute decline?
Well, it's relative decline. I mean, I think this is going to be a very, very painful period for America, and I don't know how it's going to respond to this, and what one can imagine it turning in various directions, or maybe all of them actually at some point. It's probably most likely, and I think they're going to find this very, very difficult. I mean, as Britain found it very difficult. I mean, my life has been bounded by British decline, and I think we found it very, very difficult, and we still, in some ways, can't bear it.
Okay, well, let's come back to. Well, you left Cambridge. You went to teach in Bristol.
Yeah.
In economic
history. Yeah.
Economic history.
Yeah.
For how long did you go there?
I was there for 6 years, and I mean, when I went to Bristol, I found after Cambridge, I found Bristol very sleepy and boring. I've always been a very sort of a proactive kind of person, so I tried to do something about it in my own way. I mean, one of my skills has always been, which I don't use anymore, but I was quite an inventive person, socially inventive person. So, for example, the campaign here, which must have been around the time you arrived, for after the Garden House,
yes,
and the formation of the Cambridge Students' Union. I mean, I was the guy that masterminded all that sort of thing, and I really took. I mean, I don't remember the big unemployment marches, the People's March for Jobs, but that was my. So I loved doing that, and I did that obviously with Marxism Today and so on later. So I really I enjoyed thinking afresh, how to do things, how to. I got a great deal of stimulation from and.
So you tried to shake up Bristol. Did you succeed?
Oh, no, I didn't. Old slaves, they did this. I think that. Yeah, we had. I was an academic, so I was in a different situation anyway. And so I remember, I got a left staff group going, and there was a sort of what we call critical seminar, which was for students and staff, and so there were various things I did, but. And I was, writing and so on, but academically. But I think that I think in my mind I had somewhere in my mind decided I wasn't going to stay as an academic. Whether I'd actually consciously reached that decision. At what point I reached it, but I think that I was not, or put it in another way, I was not committed to being an academic. That's probably more honest, actually, thinking about it. That's probably where I was.
Were you already involved in journalism and starting sort of leftish journals and things by that time?
No, nothing, absolutely nothing. In Cambridge, one of the things I wasn't involved with, for example, was the shilling paper. In Manchester, I was never involved with the student newspaper. I had no interest whatsoever in journalism, none whatsoever. But I was interested in, you know, that here I was very active and by now very prominent in the Communist Party with, you know, a serious political following, which was sort of Euro-communism, if you like. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I was by now a sort of power broker, if you like. I mean, these are all gross oversimplifications. And I got, you know, they were rewriting the program, and I became a key figure in the rewriting of the program. There was an argument. The thing was so divided, so fractious. And then I got asked, would I edit Marxism Today?
Would you edit it? Yeah. It was already going.
Yeah. It was started in 1957.
Oh, right.
After the 20th Congress in Hungary. And I'd never thought of doing something like that in my life. It didn't appeal to me. What appealed to me was that it was a potentially reformable organisation which could have a different path, you know, informed by my kind of Gramscian thoughts and so on. That was how I saw it. So after much agonising, I accepted. I mean, one of the reasons for it, I mean, agonising, I felt, if I get out of academia now, which people didn't do that but in 1977, I thought, if I get out of it now, then I'll never get back into it or whatever. So I felt I was burning my boats. And also I was taking a colossal drop in salary. You know, I was going to something like 25% of what I'd been earning or something. It was a
big risk.
It felt like it.
Right, so you took a huge cut in salary, you moved to London and you became editor of Marxism Today.
Yep.
How was that?
Well,
who was on the board to begin with?
It was, I mean...
Interesting people?
No, it was one of those boards which was largely sleeping and inert.
Oh, right.
And it was, I mean, it didn't even have people who were there to keep an eye on me because it hadn't been like that. Well, when I first started, I to be honest with you, I had no intention of doing much with it because I regarded it to be the way in rather than the thing I wanted to do. But very rapidly, I mean, within the first couple of years, the positions that I was associated with got a series of defeats. And I'd been elected to the political committee. I was knocked off after 2 years as part of the process that went on. You know, I really had no choice then but to take the magazine, or journal as it was called then, much more seriously. And actually I realised very rapidly when I took the position that I had made a big mistake. In my heart of hearts, I knew that the organisation was unreformable, but it was only when I got on the inside of it. It was quite a lesson, actually, that this was the case. I'm not a quitter. I never have been in anything a quitter. But I thought, well, I'm going to concentrate on Marxism Today. And the more I concentrated on Marxism Today, the more I enjoyed it. And, you know, I like acquiring new skills. I've spent my life moving around in lots of ways and so on, and acquiring and assimilating new skills. And I realised over time that I was an extremely good editor, you know? And I'm also, you know, what goes with my skills is I'm sort of, you know, I really enjoy strategic thinking. And so I developed a strategy from nothing. I mean, I didn't have any qualification to do what I was about to do, except that, you know, I was, you know, reasonably educated person. But I began to find where to take it, and I learned about the principles of publishing and design and the commercial aspects of it and advertising, all the things he'd never done before, and it became absolutely fascinating, but in 1982 it became, it was basically impossible to get hold of it. When I took it over, it had a circulation of about 3,000, and when and then I got it on sale in W.H. Smith, because you couldn't get it in that kind of place, and it became a big talking. It became public, became a talking point, and then it became the talking point really on the left. And we broke the debates on Thatcherism. I mean, that's where the term was first used in its pages, and we were so innovative. And good writers attract good writers. And
who were your star writers?
Well, the two most important writers in the history of Marxism today, in my view, were Eric Hobsbawm and Stuart Hall. Eric, because Eric mainly about the left and about the state of the Labour Party and so on, but of course Eric's got a great range. And Stuart Hall on Thatcherism. And these were these two wrote some extremely important articles, but many other people, some not so consistently and not usually so importantly, but many other writers contributed some very, very important pieces. And what I found, we had to invent a new kind of writing. It was no use getting academics to write as academics, because they don't know how to write. They don't exactly know what to write about and what the audience is, because they don't have a conception of audience of themselves. And the other obvious writers are journalists, but the problem with journalists is they can't sustain an idea beyond 1,000 words at the most. That's for the people who can write columns. So we had to find a sort of, let's say, a 4,000 or 5,000 word style article, between 3 and 5, 3 and 6 at the outside, which people learn how to write for, whether they were academics or whether they were journalists or whether they were something else, but predominantly they tended to come from those two bits, but not exclusively by any means. So we had to invent a new kind of writing. This was a very, very, very interesting project, and I think that the magazine was associated historically with, apart from all its innovations, its design, it was very, it was really smart. Operation, but it became a very smart operation. I mean, I started off on my own, one person, with a secretary working 3 days a week who was in her mid-70s, and another secretary who was 81. That's how I started off. So they weren't really, they were not going to be very useful, unfortunately. But we finished off with, a sale of 25,000, and I mean, we never got any decent money, but we had, I don't know how many people, we had 10 full-time equivalents by the end, so it was, it was a big, maybe a dozen, I can't remember now, and we organised these huge events. We had, roughly every 2 years, and it became, the three major ideas were Thatcherism, the decline of the left, and New Times post-Fordism, and so on. Those three ideas, and I'm very proud of what we achieved in that period. I think it was for me one of the two most stimulating things I've ever done in my life.
And the other was
writing the book on China.
Right. Well, we'll come to that. I mean, was this the time that the New Left review was starting too, or had that been earlier?
No, that was earlier.
Yeah.
A New Left review was, New Left was going and still going, but it was much more esoteric and much more elitist, really, in the sense that it didn't you know, it didn't talk about. It was on a different plane, really.
I see.
Marxism Day deliberately, you know, I thought of Marxism Day had to be conjunctural, whereas New Left Review is not conjunctural. It had to address questions that were on people's minds now, and had to address them in a way that had a significant and important audience, and that it never spoke simply to the left. That what we wrote was of interest to, because would be of interest and engagement for anyone who was seriously interested in political debate. So very early on we developed a real audience on the right, on the radical right. I mean, the radical right used to read us because we were the best on Thatcherism. So I became, you know, I had quite a few friends on the right. And I liked having right-wing people writing Marxist Day because, I mean, of course, you couldn't do that at the beginning because it would have been laughed out of court. But by the time the magazine had established its reputation, I mean, what happened really was, you know, I was marginalised earlier on, you know, in these debates and arguments and so on. I lost my position on political committee, not in the executive committee. But what happened then was the Communist Party went into decline as Marxism Today rose. So, you know, by the end there was Marxism Today and there wasn't really a Communist Party.
But you were still a member of it.
Yeah, I stayed on because I mean, if I hadn't been doing Marxist Day, I would have left much earlier. But there you go.
When did you leave the party, or did it?
When I heard that they'd accepted Soviet money until I can't remember what year it was. It stopped. The 60s sometime. It was before, I think it was before I was active in it, but no one had, you know, I felt I'd been, I took it very personally. I felt people had lied to me about it because, you know, they'd always said that it wasn't true. And it was okay, it was dead. I mean, people said, why did you get so excited about that? You know, it was obvious that had been happening. And I said, wait a minute again. But I can't remember, after 1989.
When you were
I closed it then.
You closed it in Marxism.
I closed it at the end of 91 because I felt I was exhausted from it. I'd done it for
91.
Yeah, I did it for 77, and I did it. It was a tremendous innings to be on such low. I mean, of course, the last 4 or 5 years I became sort of, you know, an in-demand columnist and so on. So I found other ways of supplementing my income. So I, you know, it was quite a long time as a columnist of Sunday Times and the Times, and I did, you know, things at the BBC and all that. But for 10 years, that was mainly basic. My income was Marxism Day. But by the end, I couldn't see, you know, I wanted to get out myself, and I couldn't see how it was going to carry on except to go in precipitous decline and become a pale shadow of what it was. And as I hate, one of the traditions of British culture I hate is the way people won't bury something when it's time to bury it. So London is littered with these organisations, and I thought, we close it. We've had a great time. It's been a great thing to do, but don't let's be spoiled. It's what it's achieved by limping on into oblivion. So I closed it, and I'm sure it was the right thing to do because that's exactly what would have happened.
When did you become, and 2 other things you did, you co-started or started Demos?
Yeah. I'm not so proud about Demos. I mean, Mark's now very proud of, you know. You know, there's nothing seriously I regret about Mark. I think, you know, this was a great thing to do, and it had a very good, I think it had, you know, there's nothing that we were identified with that I regret being identified with, or you know, on the contrary, all the things, you know, I'm proud of Marxism Today. But Demos, it was coming out of Marxism Today, and there were 2 things I thought. 1, we should try and set up a new magazine, and 2, we should set up a think tank, because what Marxism Today wasn't good at was, you know, what should we do? That was not what our forte was. So what should we do is the job of a think tank. So the magazine, we got involved in discussions with the Pearson Group, FT Group, and and the Guardian, and eventually we went with the Guardian, but it was on the condition that, from my point of view, that it wasn't just the Guardian, it was someone, a European partner. But in the timescale that I gave them, they never found anyone. So I worked on the project for about a year, and then I abandoned it. And then the Demos, well, the problem with Demos is that I think the idea of Demos was, let's have a think tank which is sort of not so obviously of the left that Marxism today was, but is a bit freer than that. Draws in, as Marxism today had in the latter part of its life, people from other sort of politics other than the left. So it's freer. That was the idea. And anyone who's really interesting, we'll get them involved. So it was a bit free floating. I didn't want to do it myself. I was too tired from 14 years of not earning much money, and it's hard work when you've got setting something up like that from scratch without much money. And I didn't fancy doing that for Demos, so I felt someone else would be better, someone younger, etc. So I got Jeff Mulgan, who'd collaborated on Marx and Day and so on, and was a very bright chap in his 20s, late 20s, early, I think when he started about 29, 30, something like that. And he was director and I was. But Demos went off in a direction I didn't really feel comfortable with. I mean, it became, in a way, an advance guard for Blair. And that was not where I was. And I mean, I knew Blair. There was a short period when I was quite close to him, close in the sense of we still saw each other politically. We were exploring each other rather than being close to each other. But so Demos lost its bearings, I think, or maybe it never really had bearings, and that idea I had wasn't strong enough. So it still exists, it's still going, but it's not something that I have any, I feel queasy about it.
So what is your assessment of Blair? After the event, rear view mirror.
I think Blair was a disaster. I think that Blair, it was potentially a great moment for Labour, 1997. I mean, it's a huge electoral victory. I thought wrongly at the time that John Smith couldn't have produced necessarily a Labour victory. I think I was wrong about that. I think that people were so fed up with the Tories by then. I mean, Blair no doubt added the icing on the cake when it came to the size of the majority, but there still would have been a thumping majority. And my view I'd supported Blair as for leader of the Labour Party because I felt that I still was very concerned that the main problem was to defeat the Conservatives after all that time. And so I thought, well, Blair will give them a very hard time, which of course electorally did give them a very hard time. But I wasn't sure what he'd be like afterwards. And I wasn't very clear about that at the time of his election. But I very rapidly felt that actually this talk of a project, actually the fundamental project he had, he didn't have an independent project. There was only one project in town, and that was the Thatcherite project of neoliberalism. And Blair was, if you like, I mean, he bought that hook, line and sinker. And so his only project really was the defeat of the hard left and the Labour Party steering this new course. Well, he didn't even really do that. Neil Kinnock did that, the Bournemouth speech and all that. So I thought that this is rather extreme thing to say, but you know, he was, I mean, what was this, he didn't belong to the Labour, he wasn't of that culture. Now, one of the things that attracted me originally about Blair was he wasn't of that culture because he recognised that the culture was in some ways broken, if that was Marx and Day's argument. But he didn't belong to it at all. He was as close to a conservative leader of the Labour Party we've had since 1945. And of course, Iraq, well,
dreadful,
awful, awful. In so many different ways, it was a dreadful thing to do.
Do you think he's realised that it was, or do you think, I mean, he protests that it was all fine and he won't apologise. One doesn't know whether it's obstinacy or not wanting to be sued, or whether he really still believes that it was all fine.
Do you know, I'll never take seriously something like the International Criminal Court. While people like Bush and Blair go scot-free, how can anyone take it seriously? So they'll get some African leader who, you know...
Exactly, yes. Done some petty pilfering.
Yeah.
Well, we agree on all this. So let's move on to the Far East. How was it you first got involved with, was it Hong Kong or Japan or China? Where did you first start getting interested in that area? I
first started when I went on a trip to Japan in 1979, but it was for a conference I was giving, my first public paper on Thatcherism, actually. This was right at the beginning. And I had a tiny bit of time to look around. I was very interested in what I saw. I was very interested in the Japanese I met at through the conference. But really that was the end of it. And then I'd given up Marxism today at the end of 91. And 92 was the hangover from that, if you like. Still working on this new project. And then 93, going on holiday, and I'd never had any money for all that time, and I never had any time.
And did you have a family by this time?
I had a partner of long standing.
You said you'd been married. You'd been married.
I was married.
And then
the relationship was
when you were at
didn't work.
Yeah.
So that broke up in 1973.
Yeah. Yes.
We were not suited. I mean, I was still in contact with them, so we're still friends, but not close friends. But we still keep in touch. But I didn't have any children.
Yeah.
And then. Which some people think was very strange because, you know, I'm a very child-orientated person. And then now I had some money, and now I had time. So a friend had said, well, why don't they'd just been to East Asia, so okay, that sounds good. So Hong Kong, southern China, Singapore. And then my partner wanted to spend a few days in the sun, so we finished off on an island off Malaysia. And this was the holiday that changed my life hugely, because no sooner I arrived in Hong Kong, which, as you know, is not the most interesting place in the world, but after you've been mainly in Europe all your life, it is interesting. And intellectually, I was absolutely fascinated by everything. And the truth is, by now I was bored writing about Britain and thinking about Britain. I mean, I've been doing it for how long? I've been doing it since I was at university in a big way. I've been such a politicized character and intellectual, writing about these things and so on. And I was bored by it, and I wanted, and this was just something completely new. And then, right at the end of Malaysia, I met my wife-to-be, Harry, which was difficult. I was there with my partner. And you know, I fell in love basically at first sight with Harry. I mean, it was just extraordinary. She was Indian Malaysian, and she was there on a bonding trip. She's a lawyer in KL, and just within a few minutes of talking to her, I couldn't, you know, just, I was complete, and I was not wrong. I mean, I'd fallen in, I had met my soulmate. I had met the person who, for me, my life was the meaning of my life. You know, I was 47 and I met her, and this was the great moment of mine. And the greatest things I ever done was to trust my emotions at that moment and meeting her, and follow how I felt about Harry. So my relationship with Harry became intricately bound up with my growing interest in East Asia.
You then went back a year later, or?
Well, no. What happened was that you know, 3 days. I met Harry on Saturday. She left on Sunday. I mean, nothing happened, but everything happened, and we went back to London on the Tuesday, and then I couldn't get Harry out of my mind, and I was starting a television program for the BBC afterwards, which was about the decline of politics and politicians. It was a big subject then. And so I thought, I'll interview, you know, I knew Chris Patton well. I thought, well, Chris Patton might be an interesting person to interview, but he was in Hong Kong, so, you know, we flew out, I interviewed him in Hong Kong. And then I thought, hey, if I'm going to Hong Kong, that's not that far from Malaysia. Typical bloody European mentality. So I found a way of going down to Malaysia for less than 24 hours and seeing Harry, and nothing happened. And I thought, oh no, it wasn't. And then from Hong Kong, I phoned you in the morning, and I would just go. I'd say just to say thanks very much for, you know, hosting me, and basically say goodbye. And then she said in the conversation, she said, I'm missing you. And she never said anything like that. I was in Kuala, but that was then I knew that our feelings were absolutely mutual. And then I didn't see her again till Christmas in Hong Kong again, actually, it so happens. But by then, and that's when my relationship with Philippa broke down. And well, I told Philippa, and that was the end of our very long relationship. And Harry, the following September, came to live in Hong Kong, but before that, in London, sorry. And then, but before that, I went to see her in Malaysia a couple of times. So that there was a very that personal story is part and parcel of what happened to me, and my new interests, as well as being, you know, I finally met the person who that I'd always wanted to meet, and we had Ravi in August 1998, just before we went to live in Hong Kong.
How were you living in Hong Kong? What were you doing in Hong Kong?
Well, what happened was that at first, after this, in 1993, then basically in 1993, I was making television programs for the BBC and writing a column for the Sunday Times, and then I got offered a job as deputy editor of the Independent. It was when Whittam Smith and so on were going, and which I accepted. Ian Hargreaves was a friend. He was deputy editor of the FT at the time, and he became new editor. And I accepted round about the time I started was when Harry came to live in England. Actually, it was a terrible. I thought to myself, I can't go wrong with this job because I'm a really good editor. But, I say so myself. A great editor. But so I'll enjoy it, and if it doesn't work out, then I haven't lost anything. I was wrong. It was a horrible job. Horrible. I didn't like this job at all. It was like a senior management job, and there wasn't that much editing. But worst of all, the paper was in an atrocious mess, and the shareholders were in conflict with each other, and so it was a bit like a kind of a roll-on, roll-off ferry. It was lurching. It was, and of course we had to make half the staff redundant within a year. So it was a very unhappy ship. So I resigned in beginning of '96, and then I did bits of writing and so on. Like I've been in television and so on, and then someone, I think it was Neil Ferguson, said, "Why don't you write a book?" I knew Neil Ferguson quite well. And Neil said, and I said, "What should I write on?" Well, it's obvious what you're going to write on. That television series. I'd made a 2-part series in '96 on called The End of the Western World, which was about the rise of East Asia. And he said, "Do that." And so as I thought about it, I'd never really been attracted about writing. I know this sounds odd, Alan, but I'd never been attracted by the idea of writing a book, actually. But as I thought about it, I thought, this does attract me. And of course I was, steady visitor. I found all sorts of excuses to go out to everywhere in the region, newspaper things or television thing or this, or sometimes, of course, Malaysia was to see Harry and then she was asked by her firm. She got a job with Lovells, which is a big international law firm in London, and then it was suggested to her that she take a secondment in one of their Asian offices, because probably her future as a partner, she wasn't a partner then, but to become a partner in one of the Asian offices. So we discussed it, we agreed to do it. Just about the same time she got pregnant. And but anyway, we decided to go ahead. We went to Hong Kong in November 1998. I was, started the book. 14 months later, Harry died in hospital in Hong Kong. It was a catastrophe. I mean, I'm tough, I'm a very resilient person, but it was the only thing I knew I'd never be able to cope with. Ravi was just 16 months, and it was 5 years before I could work again after Harry died properly. I mean, I could write. It took me 2.5 years just to be able to write a newspaper article again. It was something I could do in 2 or 3 hours, a drop of a hat normally. And that was and I don't know whether you know the background, but Harry suffered a lot of racial discrimination in Hong Kong.
I've read some of your stuff on them.
And and her death was clearly a product of what happened in the hospital was clearly a product of negligence. That was patently obvious, but she was being discriminated against. That's what she told me. That's what was going on. She spoke good Cantonese. I didn't speak Cantonese, and so.
But you were left with a little child.
16 months. Yeah.
It was a boy. Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how were you managing to cope economically? Because you couldn't write. You had a little boy. You were living in Hong Kong. I mean, you couldn't be a journalist if you couldn't write. How were you surviving?
I survived. After a bit, I got bits of money together from writing. I don't know. I can't remember. 12,000 a year. I think it was 13,000 a year. We got a small pension from Harry's policy at work, and I had quite a lot of savings, because one of the advantages of learning to live on an extremely low income, as I did in Marston today, is when you have a very high income, you don't initially know how to spend it. So I saved a lot of money in that period. And we just sort of
lived simply.
got by, very simply. Of course, I had no. I didn't go out because I had no desire to go out. I became it changed me as a person. I became quite very introverted. I've never been like that. I became quite monastic, really, a hermit. And but when it finally came time when I could get back into the book, actually these were good. These are good. I never having been like this, I realised there were very, very good attributes for writing a book.
Monasticism, yeah.
So, I mean, I was always interested in lots of things, and it's difficult to do a serious piece of writing, which requires years of concentration and so on. And, when you've got this thought and that thought, and you need to get on the phone and all this kind of stuff.
You change from a fox to a hedgehog. Tell me about the book. I mean, what is the theme? I've read it, but for the person who's watching this interview, what is the central argument of the book? This is the book called When China Rules the World.
Yeah.
Not If China Rules the World.
No.
When. Okay, so.
No point in beating about the bush. Well, I mean, the theme of the book is. Well, there are two themes really. One is the first part of the book, which is a discussion about how the West invented and made modernity its own, historically and in a contemporary sense, and how we should understand modernity in its contemporary sense as pluralistic rather than singular. In other words, the journey of those countries since the 1950s that are in the process of modernizing are not going to become simply clones of the West. I mean, and this is a very interesting period because apart from Japan, all the previous countries have essentially been Western-style countries that had successfully modernized. And so, my argument is that actually we're moving into a period of contested modernity, where a competition will be broadly on the basis of capitalism, different political, cultural systems, and to some extent economic systems, with representing different types of modernity. That's the first part of the book, and the second part of the book is an argument to do with China, and that's how the book is, of course, known, and that's the bulk of the book, which is a discussion about the rise of China, the economic trends, and what China will be like as a modern country. And my argument is, following from the first part of the book as well, is that China will definitely not be a clone of the West. But if we want to try and understand what China will be like in the future, we have to look at its history. And so I argue that my major arguments in this context probably are, firstly, that it's not primarily a nation state but a civilization state, with, it seems to be, vast implications that flow from that. So its attitude towards lots of things, from its own sense of unity, its own sense of stability, its own notion of race, its own notion of the state as an institution, its relationship to society, are all profoundly different to the Western assumption experience, because it's a civilization state rather than a nation state. And secondly, the fact that for thousands of years in East Asia, which was the known world to China, and China was basically dominant in that region for that sort of period, it was organized on the basis of the tributary state system. And what the characteristics of that system were, it came to an end around about 1900, and since then it's been a colonial stroke Westphalian or a Westphalian system. But the rise of China once more in the region to become, that region is becoming China-centric very rapidly again, and we're bound to see the relationships in that region bearing echoes once more of the tributary state system. Exactly how and to what extent, well, that's a complicated question, which most of which we can't answer properly at the moment. We can only speculate. And then thirdly, in some ways I think the best chapter in the book is one that hasn't been discussed very much, but it's the one entitled Middle Kingdom Mentality, which is my attempt to explore the construction of ethnicity in China, and how it is that such a vast country, over 90% of the population, think of themselves of the same race, which is extraordinary. Mm. And what the effects of that have been, but also what the implications might be in the longer run. By and large, I think the book is very sympathetic to China, but on this, it's not about whether it's pro or anti-China. It's not written in that kind of way at all. But it's an attempt to see the world through Chinese eyes, as opposed to see China through Western eyes, and which is why we always get it wrong. And my concern, is this sort of Chinese sense of superiority, and how that is going to affect its relations with other peoples in a world which is naturally defined by its diversity. And the fourth area, a fourth major difference is the attitude towards the state, which in a way is the starkest difference. That we have a presumption, we have a certain notion of the relationship between state and society in the West, and China doesn't conform to it. We have a view that the legitimacy of the state is based fundamentally on democracy, which in our terms does not exist in China, and yet I argue that the state enjoys more legitimacy in China than it does in the West. Mm. So what are the sources of the legitimacy of the Chinese state? So this is a very interesting question, and also the state is very sophisticated institution in China, even though it's still only a poor developing country. This is the home of statecraft. So the book is an attempt to, well, I suppose it's it is obviously ambitious. It's an attempt to explain why, the world is actually tilting on its axis, mm-hmm. In the period that we're living in, and so it's historical and it's contemporary, and it's also of course looking very much into the future as well, and trying to think through what the world would be like when China is the dominant power.
Well, it's a very good book, if I may say so.
Thank you.
I liked almost all of it.
I know the part you disagreed with.
It's a Pomerantz, really.
Yeah.
But on that last point that you made, are you optimistic? It's a very crude question, but do you think a world in which China is dominant will be as good as the world we've enjoyed under American dominance, or even better?
Well, of course we don't know. This is if we knew, we'd be either more disturbed or more reassured, but we don't know. So uncertainty itself can be a source of disturbance. I think that in one sense we should be embracing what's happening without any shadow of a doubt. And the reason I say that is because ever since the British Industrial Revolution, until more or less now, or it's beginning to change now obviously, the world has been dominated by and run by such a small sliver of humanity. So this has been a very undemocratic world, extremely undemocratic world.
You mean the Fellows of King's College, Cambridge, basically?
Well, you know, because the West enjoyed such disproportionate economic power, and great demographic countries like China and India were so weak, they had so little voice. And actually, when the Western discourse about democracy has been about democracy within nation states, not about the international system, which during the period of Western domination has been extremely authoritarian. Now, it seems to me that the rise of China and India, 38% of the world's population, plus all, you know, Brazil and so on, means, in very rough and ready terms, the most important act of democratization the world has seen since the British Industrial Revolution. So I think that is why this is a good thing. I welcome unreservedly. I mean, of course, it's going to produce all sorts of new problems, environmental problems, not least climate change and so on. But these people will now have a say in the world. They'll have a voice in the world. Before they didn't. Who listened to China 30 years ago? No one listened to China 30 years ago, except people a bit round in that region. So this is a good thing. What will China be like in terms of its behavior, more, you know, China specifically? Let's say China is the dominant country in the world, which I think it will become. How will it behave? And I think this is very, very difficult to answer. I mean, I'm not of the school. I mean, a lot of the Western reaction about the rise of China is, I think, based on arrogance and ignorance. The arrogance is it's got to be worse because it's not us anymore, I suppose, to put it simply. And ignorance, because people, see, a lot of intellectuals included here, think that the rise of, you know, that these other cultures have no wisdoms. That we more or less have a monopoly of wisdom. I don't. I think all cultures, whatever the level of development, have wisdom. They've had to cope with their own circumstances, geographical, climatic, political, whatever they are. In particular, this is a great civilization, Chinese history, Chinese culture. This is not nothing. This is, you know, we have so much to learn from this. So the idea it's just going to be a sort of brutal negative, it's not going to be like that. It is absolutely not going to be like that. And it's very interesting that the rise of China has not been characterized as the rise of the Soviet Union was with a desire to engage in a military standoff. I mean, actually the Chinese have put very few resources hitherto into their military expenditure. And even today, they're just completing their first aircraft carrier. I mean, even Italy's got an aircraft carrier. India's got an aircraft carrier. Britain's got 3 aircraft carriers. And China's already the second largest country in the world economically. So I think we need to, you know, adopt a much more worldly attitude. I love this thing in Cohen's book, you know, rediscovering Chinese history. He quotes someone, but he makes a point of his own, which is, you know, the West thinks of itself as the most cosmopolitan culture in the world, but in many ways it's the most parochial, because whereas other cultures have been obliged to turn themselves inside out in their engagement with the West, principally through colonialism, but not only through colonialism, the West has never ever been obliged to rethink itself, because it's never been forced to by its relationship with the other that it thinks with which it's enjoyed a dominant relationship. And I think this is a very, very important insight into what our mental problem is about addressing these kinds of questions. So, to be honest with you, for me personally, it is hugely the most interesting thing I've ever had to think about.
Just one or two more questions on that. One is, what struck me, particularly on my last visit, was a kind of inattention within China, which is that it lives by two standards. America proclaims democracy, equality, and so on, and falls very short of that, but it knows what its ideals are. In China, you have the four principal foundations of Marxism have collapsed: equality, no class system, no state, no ideology, religious ideology, no private property, and so on. All those have come back. In other words, everyone admits it's a capitalist economy and in many ways a capitalist society now. And yet its ideology formally is still supposedly communist. And this leads, I would have thought, to a lot of dissonance, because you can't. What are you aiming at in the future? What is the goal of China in 30 years' time? Because it's given up the ideals of Mao and so on, and yet it hasn't found new ones. It doesn't want to be the West, but it doesn't want to be the main rival to the West, which was Marxism. And this, I think, is the danger, unless it finds a set of... I mean, you may answer that it's going back to its Confucian past or something like this, but yeah. I'd be interested to know what you think about how it can achieve some kind of alternative model of how it should be when it's given up the two main ones available to it.
Well, how you present it is clearly true. I think that that partly we need to interrogate the relationship between this communist period and the Confucian period, and thereby escape from a very strong way of thinking, which is clearly very influenced by the Cold War, which is the two are completely estranged and there aren't powerful lines of continuity between them. And I think there are. And I try to argue this is one. I mean, maybe I go too far in the opposite direction in the book, but I was trying to argue against what seems to me to be a mistaken position, which is extremely influential, which is this period is an aberration compared to what went before, and I don't think that's true at all. I think that the Maoist tradition clearly belongs as very much part of the Chinese tradition. And I think in many ways, Confucianism is much more influential than any of the communist tradition in the long run in shaping Chinese attitudes, be it the family or be it the state or be it the nature of education and so on. And so those things are still very powerful, I think, in China, and they will be enjoined, I think, as China gets stronger by in some senses a return to the past. I think that the difficulty China's had since '78 and the Deng Xiaoping dictum of sort of lie low and sotto voce is that they've deliberately not. The other side of this, which we don't talk about, is they've not allowed themselves to think about these questions because, well, it was a luxury under the circumstances, But when they do think about what China is, then I think there'll be a very effervescent debate about the relationship between what they were and, at some point the communist period, because I think a lot of the communist period's been in many ways, with all the bad things, very bad things, some of the bad. I mean, Mao was a complicated character. and now this period, there's a lot that there is an opening discussion, it seems to me, taking place in China, and it will be that discussion which begins to make sense, possibly, of these things and what China is, what is it, where does it come from, where is it going, what does it offer the world. These are things they're going to have to sort of sort out, I think, in their minds. They haven't sorted out where Mao is, I think, in their pantheon, because Mao is still hugely more popular than Deng Xiaoping. This is a very interesting thing, I think. Now, I think the main reason for Mao's popularity is because he reunified the country. And any emperor that reunifies the country will always be a semi-deity in China. And he also reconstructed the state, and the state is the most important institutional part of the family in China. And this was, he created, if you like, none of what's happened under Deng Xiaoping would have been possible without that achievement under Mao. The Deng achievements lie within the context of that possibility. Mao could not have done what Deng did, because he was also crazy in some ways.
Well, I think that's answered actually my questions. Just coming to the end of the tape, but is there anything that you'd like me to have asked you about that I haven't asked about? Your son, for instance, your little boy. How old is he now?
Ravi's just 13.
13, oh,
yeah.
Gosh.
And so he's now already that much taller than me.
Wow.
And he kept me going, I mean, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't had Ravi, and so we're very, very close, and I've been a very, very dedicated father, but to my great enjoyment and pleasure. And he's his own character. He looks just like his mum. He doesn't look like his dad.
Well, that's a good start.
Yeah, it is a very good start.
No,
not
negative.
No, you were right.
But I'm sure his mum is beautiful, and so on.
She was.
Anyway, on that cheerful note, I think we'll stop, and thank you very much indeed, Mark.
Thank you for your